Welcome back to Stories with Liz. Today we are doing a short story by Anton Chekhov. It was just called Without a Title, and it was released in 1888. In the 15th century, as now, the sun rose every morning and sank to rest every night. When its first rays kissed the dew, the earth awoke, and the air was filled with sounds of joy, ecstasy, and hope. And at eventide, the same earth grew still and sank into darkness. Sometimes a thundercloud would roll up and the thunder roar angrily, or a sleepy star drop from heaven, or a pale monk come running in to tell the brothers that he had seen a tiger not far from the monastery, and that was all. And then once again, day would resemble day, and night, night. The monks worked and prayed, and their old prior played the organ, composed Latin verses, and wrote out music. This fine old man had a remarkable talent. He played the organ with such skill that even the most ancient of the monks, whose hearings had grown feeble as the end of their lives drew near, could not restrain their tears when the notes of his organ came floating from his cell. When he spoke, even if it were only of the commonest things, such as trees and wild beasts or the sea, no one could listen to him without either a smile or a tear. The same notes seemed to vibrate in his soul that vibrated in the organ. When he was moved by wrath or great joy, when he spoke of things that were terrible and grand, a passionate inspiration would master him. Tears would start from his flashing eyes. His face would flush, his voice peal like thunder, and the listening monks would feel their souls wrung by his exultation. During these splendid, these marvelous moments, his power was unlimited. If he had ordered his elders to throw themselves into the sea, they would have all rushed rapturously with one accord to fulfill his desire. His music, his voice, and the verses with which he praised God were a source of never-ending joy to the monks. Sometimes in their monotonous lives, the trees, the flowers, the spring, the autumn, grew tiresome. The noise of the sea wearied them, and the songs of the birds grew unpleasing. But the talents of their old prior, like bread, they needed every day. A score of years passed. Day resembled day, and night, night. Not a living creature showed itself near the monastery, except wild beasts and birds. The nearest human habitation was far away, and to reach it from the monastery, or to reach the monastery from there, one had to cross a desert of 100 miles wide. This only those dared to do who set no value on life, who had renounced it, and joined the monastery as to a tomb. What, then, was the surprise of the monks when one night a man knocked at their gates who proved to be an inhabitant of the city, the most ordinary of sinners, with love for life. Before saying a prayer or asking the blessing of the prior, this man demanded food and wine. When they asked him how he had got into the desert from the city, he answered them by telling a long hunter's tale. He had gone hunting, and had had too much to drink, and had lost his way. To the suggestion that he should become a monk and save his soul, he replied with a smile and the words, "I am no friend of yours." Having eaten and drunk his fill, he looked long at the monks who were serving him, reproachfully shook his head and said, "You don't do anything, you monks. All you care about is your victuals and drink. Is that the way to save your souls? Think now, while you are living quietly here, eating, drinking, and dreaming of blessedness, your fellow men are being lost and damned to hell. Look what goes on in the city. Some die of starvation, while others, not knowing what to do with their gold, plunge into debauchery and perish like flies in honey. There is no faith nor truth among men. Whose duty is it to save them? Is it mine, who am drunk from morning till night? Did God give you faith and loving and humble hearts that you should sit here between your four walls and do nothing? The drunken speech of the townsmen was insolent and unseemly, yet it strangely affected the prior. The old man and his monks looked at each other. Then he paled and said, "Brothers, he is right. It is true that, owing to folly and weakness, unfortunate mankind is perishing in unbelief and sin, and we do not move from the spot, as if it were no business of ours. Why should I not go and remind them of the Christ whom they have forgotten?" The old man was transported by the words of the townsmen. On the following day he grasped his staff, bade farewell to the brothers, and set out for the city. So the monks were left without music, without his words and his verses. They waited first 1 month, and then 2, and still the old man did not return. At last, at the end of the 3rd month, they heard the familiar tapping of his staff. The monks flew out to meet him and showered him with questions, but instead of rejoicing with them, he wept bitterly and did not utter a word. The monks saw that he was thin and had aged greatly, and that weariness and profound sorrow were depicted on his face. When he wept, he had the look of a man who had been deeply hurt. Then the monks, too, burst into tears and asked why he was weeping and why his face looked so stern. But he answered not a word, and went on and locked himself in his cell. For 5 days he stayed there, and neither ate nor drank, neither did he play the organ. When the monks knocked at his door and entreated him to come out and share his sorrow with them, his answer was a profound silence. At last he emerged. Collecting all the monks about him, with a face swollen with weeping and with many expressions of indignation and distress, he began to tell them all that had happened to him during the past 3 months. His voice was calm, and his eyes smiled as he described his journey from monastery to the city. Birds had sung and brooks babbled to him by the wayside, he said, and sweet newborn hopes had agitated his breast. He felt that he was a soldier advancing to battle and certain victory. He walked alone dreaming, composing hymns and verses as he went, and was surprised when he found that he had reached his journey's end. But his voice trembled and his eyes flashed, and anger burned hot within him when he began to tell of the city and of mankind. Never before had he seen or dared to imagine what he encountered when he entered the town. Here, in his old age, he saw and understood for the first time in his life the might of Satan, the splendor of iniquity, and the weakness and despicable faint-heartedness of mankind. By an evil chance, the first house he entered was an abode of sin. Here, 100 men with a great deal of money were feasting and drinking wine without end. Overpowered by its fumes, they were singing songs and boldly saying things so shocking and terrible that no God-fearing men would dare to mention them. They were unboundedly free and happy and bold. They feared neither God, nor the devil, nor death. Did and said whatever they had a mind to, and went wherever they were driven by their desires. The wine, clear as amber, was surely intolerably fragrant and delicious, for every one who quaffed it smiled rapturously, and straightway desired to drink again. It returned smile for smile and sparkled joyfully, as if it knew what fiendish seduction lay hidden in its sweetness. More than ever weeping and burning with anger, the old man went on describing what he had seen. On the table in the midst of the feasters, he said, stood a half-naked woman. It would be hard to imagine anything more glorious and enchanting than she was. Young, long-haired, with dark eyes and thick lips, insolent and shameless, this vermin smiled, showing her teeth as white as snow, as if saying, "Behold how beautiful, how insolent I am." Splendid draperies of silk and brocade fell from her shoulders, but her beauty would not be hidden beneath a garment, and eagerly made its way through the folds, as young verdure forces itself through the earth in the springtime. The shameless woman drank wine, sang songs, and surrendered herself to the feasters. Wrathfully brandishing his arms, the old man went on to describe hippodromes, bullfights, theaters, and the workshops of artists, where forms of naked women were painted and modeled in clay. He spoke eloquently, sonorously, with inspiration, as if he were playing on some invisible instrument, and the stupefied monks eagerly hung on to his words and panted with ecstasy. Having described all the charms of the devil, the beauty of wickedness, and the enchanting grace of the infamous female form, the old man cursed Satan, turned on his heel, and vanished behind his door. When he came out of his cell the next morning, not a monk remained in the monastery. They were all on their way to the city. Go the female form, huh? The end. So it was called without a title. What would you call it if you were to name the story? Leave a comment in the comment field below if you want to join in. And I hope to see you next time. Bye for now.